So welcome to Museum Studies Grantsmanship 201, since you had 101 via the video. And I have a list of all of your questions and comments. Did everyone get the collated version of the document? What I was planning to do was, well, first I should just know a little bit about you all. How many of you are planning to go into museums as a career? So all but 2, it looks like 3. Okay, and I just need some information about your major now.
Yeah. Do you want us to go around and introduce?
Yes, go around and introduce yourself. That would be great.
Okay. I'm Angeline Jacobs. I'm a graduate student in urban and regional planning, and
Okay.
I'm in museum studies as a requirement for certification in historic preservation.
Okay, great. Historic preservation. Okay.
I'm Hannah So. I'm a museum studies master student with a concentration in art history.
Okay, great.
I'm Laura Wynn. I'm a graduate art history student with a concentration in ancient art and archaeology.
In what? In archaeology?
Ancient art, classical art and archaeology.
Oh, okay, great. But not planning to work for a museum?
Maybe. Museum, it'd be museum education.
Oh, okay.
Austin Bell. I'm a museum studies grad student with a focus in anthropology.
Okay.
I'm Natalia De Silva, and I'm also, like Austin, museum studies and anthropology.
Okay.
I'm Roger Smith. I'm a history PhD candidate and looking to go into development.
Okay, great.
I'm Jennifer Lyon. I'm a history PhD student, and I'm not sure what I want to do yet.
Okay.
I'm Elena Kimmel. I'm a museum studies grad student for art history.
Okay.
I'm Renee Kiefer. I'm also museum studies. My concentration is anthropology.
Okay.
I'm Vivian Bornick, same thing, museum studies with anthropology.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. So all of this is relevant to you regardless. That's good. All right, so I'm just going to start with the first questions and go down, and then as I go through, I really appreciate, I think you did an amazing job. Excellent job on the questions, excellent job on things that you found interesting about the talk, the first talk. So let's just start right away and get into this, and hopefully we'll get through the document. Okay, so what exactly is overhead? Overhead is general operating expenses related to that particular project. So anything you do in a museum requires overhead, including utilities, including maintenance people, including just to keep the museum open. So let's say nothing happened in the museum. Well, very little happened in the museum in terms of stuff, programs. What would it take just to keep the museum doors open? Somebody to answer the phone, the lights to be on, someone to maintain. So all of that is overhead. Make sense? Okay, do you have to spend exactly what you propose on specific items in the proposal? No. Usually there's a 10% forgiveness. So if you need to move, and it can be 10% within that budget line item that you can move around, or it can be 10% sometimes of the entire budget that you can move around without permission from the sponsor. So, but it's always better to check. If it's a really small amount and it says in the guidelines, you can just move that, just move it, and you'll be fine and you'll report it. But if it's anything significant, for instance, we had a really big thing that happened. We were doing a digital project, and where the server resided, we managed our own servers until this year, and now they're managed by the university IT department, called CNS, and Computer Network Systems. And so now we're leasing virtual space from them. So all of our files went to them, which meant that we didn't need to buy a server for the project, which caused us to then have to figure out how much is this lease attributable to our project. And that took months because CNS didn't bill us for months as they were transferring the files from our digital library center to this new server system. So up until so we didn't have much time to move money around because we didn't know how much it was going to cost for the CNS services. And it ended up that we didn't use, there was money left over that didn't get used because the costs were less than what had originally been allocated. And in that case, it was a reimbursable grant, so they didn't reimburse us for what we didn't use. So it was okay. As long as you do the project and the outcome is what you say the outcome is going to be, then you're in good shape. Food and budget related to government grants. You cannot control who eats food, right? And therefore, you cannot prove that the people eating the food are part of the program and that this isn't some kind of benefit that that it's not a controllable expense. It's not an expense that you can be accountable for, and therefore the government says they will not allow it. What should be included in overhead costs? We've already talked about that. Usually the accountant should be able to compute, in general, if you have a proposal that's going out the door, for instance in academia, our overhead for a typical program-related, not research-related, program-related project is 33.6% of the total amount that you're asking for to actually do the project. So you have, these are the expenses, it's $100,000, right? And then you have to include another $33,600 for your overhead expenses, because the university has determined that that's our overhead for doing program-related grants that are not research or outreach or other kinds of grants. You need to ask me questions if I'm not being clear, so raise your hand if there's something that I'm saying that doesn't make sense to you. But so far, are we good? All right. What will grant monies cover and what will they not cover? It depends on the agency. So it depends on the funder. Every single proposal is different. You cannot assume anything about what's allowable and disallowable. And therefore you have to read the guidelines to understand what's allowable and disallowable. So now we're going on to sponsor-related questions. The first one, program officers. It's really amazing how people become program officers. I was a program officer for a community foundation and also for the Palm Beach County Cultural Council. And it's usually people who've been in a specific field and have successfully managed grant funds for organizations, or have moved around to different organizations and have multiple different experiences. So for instance, for me, I was a program officer because I had accounting experience working for a local arts agency, so I understood how to do fund accounting. I also was an artist myself, so I understood how artists work and think. I was the resident artist in music for a county, so I understood programming because I designed my own programs. Then I was an educational manager of programs, so I understood how to write grants and I understood how to manage people and how to build a program. So usually it's people who have experience in the field of work for which they're granting funds, that they've actually been in. So for instance, a friend of mine got a job at the Institute for Museum and Library Services, and she was a librarian prior to that. So you usually come from the field and have multiple experiences that make you understand a big picture and a vision for how people can create things out of nothing. So evaluate programs and evaluate significance of programs. Who reviews the grant proposals? That's an interesting question. So it's usually volunteers, and for federal agencies, they have a pool of people who actually register to be reviewers. So you can actually go to any of the federal or state agencies. For instance, the State Division of Cultural Affairs is where museums apply for funding in the state of Florida. You could contact the state office and say, I would like to submit my resume to be a possible reviewer in the category of these categories. And I think their information is online, so you would be able to go online and just submit your resume and submit the application to be a reviewer. They're always looking for minority reviewers because they want the people who are volunteering to represent the community as a whole and not just one ethnicity. So specifically for the National Science Foundation, I know they're always looking for minority reviewers at the state level as well. So, and it's people who are generally very experienced in that discipline. So I've been a reviewer on folk art panels because I was a professional bagpiper for 10 years and played in 3 world championships, and I understand folk art. I also served on chamber music panels at the National Endowment for the Arts because I'm a chamber music player. I have a degree in clarinet performance, and so I'm also a minority. I'm Hispanic. I've also served on arts and education panel for the National Endowment for the Arts and also for the state reviews. Because when somebody knows you and you do a good job on the panel, then they invite you to be on other panels for which you have expertise once they get to know you. How do you appeal to private funders when they are likely to provide less information? You have different ways of doing this. A letter of intent is usually the traditional way of contacting a private foundation. Another way of doing it is by knowing someone who's on the board, and you can find out that information through using through the GuideStar method of the 990. Did I talk about that in the first video? So GuideStar gives you access to IRS 990 forms, and on the IRS form is a list of board members for the private foundation. So you can see if anyone on your board is familiar with anyone on that list to make a contact, a direct contact to someone on the board to see if they're going to be in your community, if you can invite them for a site visit. That's always the best way to introduce a private foundation to your work, or to be able to send them something digitally, or to send them a website link or some way of communicating with a decision maker. For private foundations, you should know that the decisions are usually made not by volunteers, but professionals who work within that private foundation. Corporate foundation funders are not easy to get, especially these days while they don't have funding for charitable gifts, unless the corporate foundation is doing extremely well. So, is the process different? No. I can give you an example of, it wasn't a grant that we were able to acquire, but for instance, Chipotle, it's right across the street. Well, there is a form online where you can apply for free food from Chipotle as a sponsorship of an event. And so we experimented with that for a Women in Science and Engineering event, and I told them how to do it. The people who were organizing the event, they submitted the application to Chipotle and got a ton of food donated. All they had to do was go pick it up. So if it's an item that they sell, so that's called an in-kind contribution. then it's very easy for them to give you something that's not cash. But if they have to give you cash, for instance, Office Depot might give you backpacks for a special program that you're doing in your museum and then fill it with art supplies or something like that. They can do that because they can deduct that from their inventory. And it costs them much less. But if they have to give you cash, then you have to know that there is a cash, there's money for a specific fund. And sometimes there are many buckets of this kind of money. Sometimes there's corporate money for events. Sometimes there's corporate money for programs or exhibits. So you have to know what there's corporate money for. And sometimes multiple people control those accounts. So usually you want to talk to the quote-unquote community relations person at a corporation to find out what funds they use in order to contribute to their communities. There are tons of legal differences between public funders and private money. And I don't think I can get into that right now. Just remember, public money belongs to the taxpayers and is more transparent, and you're much more accountable for the use of those funds. Private dollars have less strings attached because they're just happy to get rid of it. And the reason they're happy to get rid of it is because if they don't spend the allotment that they're supposed to spend in a given year, which is, I think the IRS ruling is 15% of their earnings for that year on their corpus accounts, then they can be penalized by the IRS for not spending their money in a charitable way. So what happens is the donors that have given money to that foundation could be penalized in their tax-exempt contribution if that wasn't done properly. So it's a big problem for private foundations to get rid of the money that they're supposed to get rid of. And you know, when the stock market was doing really well and private foundations were making lots of money, they had big problems giving it away because they're not geared up to give away more than their guidelines permit or than their applicants request. So then they have to go out and solicit applications for specific projects so they can get rid of their money. And that's, you know, I gave examples of the MacArthur Foundation, I think, in the last video, doing that, calling me and saying, you know, we have money we need to give away, can we structure a project and can you help us do this and get an application to us, etc. Roles of program officer and best ways to interact with them if they are usually very difficult. They're very different. So you cannot say that program officers, because they're individual people and they all have different personalities. So in NEH, for instance, National Endowment for the Humanities, that also funds many museums. The program officers there will read your proposal and give you feedback. If you have a relationship with them and you talk to them and they want you to talk to them. So they will edit, they will go through your proposal and send you back by email all the things that are wrong with it, or they will talk to you by phone if you have a group of committee people who are in your organization and who want to learn from the program officer in real time. They'll go through the proposal and tell you what's wrong with it. The Institute of Museum and Library Services will not do that. So you have to learn what you can ask for and what you can't ask for, but if you don't ask, you'll never know what kind of assistance the program officer will give you or will not give you. So a good question is, hi, I'm Vesta Farber, is this a good time to talk to you? If you're talking to them by phone, or preferably sending an email. Much preferred to send an email. And it says, you know, you introduce yourself, I have some questions, when would be a good time to talk? And then you want to know all the things that you want to know, which is, how much help can I get from you on my proposals? What do you traditionally provide to potential applicants in terms of support? community foundations other than United Way, etc. So if you go and Google on your computer, Community Foundation Gainesville, you will see that we have our own community foundation. You can do that right now. You can Google Community Foundation Gainesville, Florida, and see what comes up. So, Suchi, how do I get online? Am I getting there? Am I there? Yeah, so, can you get to the library's grants page? Did you find it? So there you should be able to look for guidelines for grant submission. Or for grant seekers, or to apply for a grant. Right? Did you find anything? Okay, Women's Giving Circle, Gainesville Community Foundation, Grant Making Strategy and Guidelines. So that's one category of funding that's available through the Community Foundation, is this Women's Circle. So they have a group of women who contribute annually individual gifts to this fund. And then there's a process for applying to get money from this fund, and the guidelines are there. I think you should search within, when you get to the community, is that the Community Foundation right there? Here it is. Women's Circle, maybe it's not so easy. I don't know how they.
It's under the Women's Giving Circle tab.
Yeah, it's under, oh, okay, there you go. So that's just one fund that's available through the Gainesville Community Foundation. So each community usually has a community foundation where private donors give their money to the foundation, and then the foundation re-grants that money out to the community. Same way that United Way does. United Ways collect money, and then they re-grant it through a grant-making process to other nonprofits. Does that make sense? Okay. Do we have it? Oh, that's great. Yeah. No, not yet. I need our general page. Yeah, this is good. Great. All right. So what I wanted to show you in here, under, is it articles or workshops? For did everyone know how to get to my site, to the site for library grantsmanship stuff? I don't know, Dr. Wilson, did you have people go to this site yet?
Only to see your video.
Oh,
We had to
okay.
go through here.
Yes, you went through here to see the video. So what's interesting here is that they're under workshops, under NIH workshops, there is a video that we have that actually shows you a grant review process. So you can hear and see how these volunteers review these projects. It is for health, but it gives you an idea of what does this grant review look like. This is a huge panel, okay? For the arts, usually it's not huge. Usually, maximum, it's about 6 people, 3 to 6 people. So, but I think that would be a good thing to view if you are interested in that. I'm gonna wanna come back to this later. Okay. Can public, private, or corporate funders take money away after it has been awarded to an institution? Only if you misbehave. Usually they don't find out that you've misbehaved until after the fact, when there's an audit. So for instance, there have been a bunch of universities who have gotten in trouble for spending money inappropriately. And now I'm looking for my questions. Here we go. Okay. And so there's an audit done at the university by auditors who come in from that agency, and they discover discrepancies, and then they can fine the university an X amount of dollars to recoup losses that were experienced because funds were used inappropriately. So the answer is usually not during the grant period, but after the proposal and the project are complete and there's an audit, there can be fines and return of funds. Okay, are we good so far? Am I boring you? Okay. Application proposal related questions. Reviewing prior awards to other, do you mention them at all? You should, whenever possible, especially if you're matching money or if you're proposing to match money, meaning that there's a requirement for match, you can prove that you've been able to get matching funds for the project from other funders in the past, or that you have a track record of actually getting funded projects. So that has, you usually write about your organization's image or capacity to manage grant funds or complete projects. And in that section where they talk about, maybe it's called a profile of your organization, then you would indicate information about past awards that you've received. Sometimes NEH, for instance, asks you to list who else has funded this type of project in the past. But sometimes they don't, and you need to know that you should put that in somewhere in your profile, that you have experience and here's your track record. And if you can make it discipline specific, so if it's past exhibits, that you've gotten funding for these exhibits, if you're doing an exhibit proposal, or if you're doing a planning proposal, what funding have you gotten in the past for planning? Staying on mission aspect of assessment of readiness. Does the organization do things, apply for programs and exhibits that are not related to its mission simply because it needs money to do something? So I have seen organizations do things that they shouldn't be doing because it's not part of their mission. So it's kind of, you call it the dog tail wagging the dog instead of the dog wagging the tail. So you want to make sure you're applying for things that make sense within the mission of your organization. Who does the marketing research in-house or out? I don't know who asked the question, but I'm not understanding in regards to what? Marketing research in regards to what? Anybody want to help me out? So the question is, who does the marketing research in-house or outsourced? I guess the person who asked isn't here. I'm going to skip it since I don't want to guess. How to choose the proper people for listing and grant, and are they genuine participants or just visual fluff and not collaborations? You want to list the people who you're working with on the project. And if you're not working with them, don't include them, because it's going to be a surprise to them that they're in your grant proposal. And this happens all the time. people, you know, I have heard that people make stationery. You know, you can make a stationery, you go and you grab the logo and you make stationery and you write a false letter that says this institution is supporting your project. I have heard that done. You can easily do graphic design now, where in the past it was much more difficult. So the other thing is that you don't want to do key personnel. So an application will say, please, who are the key personnel involved in your project? You need to know not to go too deep in your organization. So if you're doing a digital project, you want the director of the digital library to give you, for their resume to be in there. But the person doing the scanning, you don't need they're not key personnel. That's just a scanner. You can get a scanner anywhere. I can teach you tomorrow how to do the scanning. So it's the important key personnel that if you didn't have these people, you wouldn't be able to do the project, but also people who have credentials. Because you're usually giving a short bio or you're adding their resume, and it should be a significant resume to impress the reviewers. Sample attachments, all needed or how many? You read the guidelines to find out how many attachments you're allowed to give. And if you're confused, call the program officer and make sure you don't give them what they don't want. Trust me, they do not want, I always ask, can we send this, can we send this? And sometimes they say no. So don't assume that you can attach a huge document to the proposal without permission, unless in the guidelines it states that they want to see it. So I think I answered what happens if your project isn't conducted as planned or something big does change. You have to call and talk to someone about this living thing that you're managing, because you're managing people, and people can get hit by a bus or get sick or can take a job outside of your organization, and that can inhibit your program or project. So all of these are people dependent, correct? So most projects are interdependent and dependent on people. Very little can be done without people. And people have lives and they change. And therefore, things happen. For instance, with that example of the servers, that was a huge change, especially because it was a project to digitize aerial photographs of Florida and put them in an aerial photography of Florida collection. And the methodology for redundant preservation of these files changed in the middle of the project, because the entire operation of how we preserve and serve our collections changed. So you have to have a conversation with the program officer about any major changes. Okay, can standard sample attachments be created? Yes. You should have, yes?
So this is on the previous question. What if something happens, are you allowed to ever put a hold on a grant? Like if you're in the middle of conducting a project and something goes wrong and it can't be completed, can you request
Yes.
like a
You can
to have
get,
it
it's
finished
called,
later?
yes, it's called, the technical term is no-cost extension. So you want to request a no-cost extension, but some agencies do not allow for no-cost extensions. So that means you're not asking for extra money, that you budgeted the right amount of money, but you can't finish the project because something happened. People weren't hired in time, you couldn't find the right employees to hire with the funds, somebody left that was supervising the project, et cetera, et cetera. It's usually people related. But there are situations where there's no extension. And what you need to do is communicate with the program officer at least 2 months prior to the end date, the grant period end date, and say, it looks like we're not gonna finish the full project in time. But we did all this extra work that was not part of our project. So you can get credit for doing other things that are related to your project. There's ways of making the pain less for the program officer so that they feel better about you, because what you want is a good relationship so you can go back to the well again and get another and try again. But if you continuously do not finish your projects, you will not be fundable. And everybody talks to everybody else. So you lose your reputation. Okay, I'm at, the sample attachments. You should have a file with boilerplate information, especially your annual budget, your actual annual budget, your proposed annual budget, your profile information that gets updated annually. There should be just a folder on in your electronic file where you have resumes of people that you have used in the past, bios for people you've used in the past, a profile of your organization, an organizational flow chart that shows how your organization works, annual budgets, that kind of thing that you use over and over again. But usually you change and update those on an annual basis. Who the grant writer should and should not work with. Okay, so someone called and talked to Phyllis at the Harn, and she said that she does grants. It's not optimal for the person in charge of development to also be the grant writer. And there is no separate grant writer at the Harn. And I personally and professionally do not think that that's a very healthy model. And you can find out how many grants are actually written in a given year and determine whether that's a low number or not.
Well, she admitted that it was a low number, but I guess her rationale to put it, not in like intellectual terms, but she said she would rather go out to lunch with someone 3 times in a row and get as much money than writing a stack of paper, that's 3 inches thick. So that, I guess that was her rationale.
Yes, and I would completely agree with her. But there are two, as an investor, you want your portfolio to be diverse, right? You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. If the economy goes kaput, like it did, and in Gainesville, there's a handful of donors that can afford to support the Harn, right? What if they move? And what if their stock just gets blown away? I can give you a real example of this. Actually, I have a juicy example. It's actually a question that's later down in this. Let's see. It's the question that says, has there been an instance you know of where something happens to a funder's financial situation and they cannot complete funding on a contracted grant? What would happen if this situation did occur? So I can tie the two together. Do you want to hear this? This is really sad, I think. So I'm going to Google Picower Foundation. Actually, I'm going to take you down here to Jeff Picower Wikipedia. So this is Mr. Picower, born in 1942, died in 2009. Mr. Picower had his money with Mr. Madoff. He was a multimillionaire living in Palm Beach. He and his wife created the Picower Foundation that gave money to MIT for a brain institute, that funded many of the museums in Palm Beach County. and with money that came from Bernie Madoff's investments. Does everybody know who Bernie Madoff is? No, I know, I'm getting some no's, and that's okay. Bernie Madoff did a pyramid scheme where he took investors' money and used that to pay other investors and didn't actually invest the money. And so he did this scheme over and over again with people that became friends of his, because he used to work on Wall Street and was a very highly paid and respected investing, I guess, what would you call him? He was a professional investor. He managed giant funds, right? So when he went on his own with his sons to create this company, he embezzled all these people's money, but it went on for years. So the Pickowers were the highest beneficiary of the Bernie Madoff money. And so they created this foundation, and the foundation gave money to tons of organizations. I'm telling you, it was a cash cow, and lots of people depended on their money on an annual basis. So he was actually sued because they couldn't figure out how in 2 weeks he went from $125 million to $164 million, and not knowing that there was something fishy about this. So Jeff took money, took this money and then re-granted it out. And he died October 25th in his swimming pool. He had a massive heart attack, and his wife found him at the bottom of the pool. It can happen to anyone. There were many foundations that put their money with Bernie Madoff's funds and lost everything, but this was the foundation that lost the most millions of dollars. It was the largest one. I think that at one time the foundation had $97 million. Do you understand what I'm talking about? And I lived in Palm Beach County, so I knew the Pickowers through their work in philanthropy, and they were really caring people, and they did give money to all of these wonderful projects. Okay, so that answers that one. But
and so what happened to the, but what about the people who were in the middle of a grant cycle? They just didn't, they had to call them and say, we're sorry, we can't fund it.
They fired people, people lost their jobs all over the country. Yeah. You know, everything changed. When you lose big money like that, I mean, they didn't give out little grants. They gave out huge $1-million grants, multi-million-dollar grants. And then the organization becomes dependent on that. They ramp up, they hire people, they do projects in the community, and then all of a sudden it goes away. I don't know about the Brain Institute at MIT. I don't know if it still exists, or if it's on a shoestring, or if it was endowment money, because of the way things went. The institutions that received the Bernie Madoff money didn't have to give that money back, because it came through the Pickowers to someone else. The responsibility was of the Pickowers and their board. So the fiduciary responsibility for taking that money and re-granting it resided in the foundation, but it was the chairman of the board. They went after the Pickowers because they owned the foundation where all this money went. So it was pretty devastating for lots and lots and lots of people. Horrible. Okay, let's go back. Hopefully I can find this. There we go.
But that's an extremely, I take it that's a pretty unusual situation.
Very
Where
unusual.
somebody can't fund the grant.
But there were tons of foundations all over
Because
the
of-
country
because of Madoff?
who had invested with
Okay.
Madoff.
Okay.
So the tentacles went out, you know, all over.
You-
Into Israel too. I mean, it was an international thing. It wasn't just in this country.
Can I interrupt and ask about gossip then? Do you know if it's true that that's what happened to Brandeis in the Rose Museum?
I don't know.
That's the rumor in the field, is that their investor, the people who supported that museum, they closed the museum, they're selling the collection. And the art world is up in arms about it. This will be 2 weeks from now.
It wouldn't surprise me.
And the rumor
because-
was that it was Madoff money, that it supported it and then it disappeared.
Right.
For Brandeis generally, actually,
Right.
the entire university, and that's why they had to sell the collection.
It wouldn't surprise me at all. The way that Bernie worked was through his connections in the Jewish community. And I know that Brandeis is supported by Jewish philanthropy. And so there was a trusting thing.
Mhm.
It was done through rabbis. It was done through rabbis who would then recommend Bernie Madoff to their parishioners. So it was word of mouth that people then invested in him. And it went on for so long that it was reliable money.
Mhm.
Because it was such a long-term, consistently providing that much money, and he was out there getting more investors and more investors all the time.
And is that true generally of private foundations? That you can come back to them every year, that it's in a perverse way, a kind of endowment? That you can expect to go back?
It depends on the relationship that
Okay.
you have. It's a lot easier for a foundation with limited staff to give
Sure.
money to the same organization every year unless they have a policy against it.
Mhm.
But it's so much easier for them to invite applicants and do it's an invitation only.
Mhm.
It's called pre-selection. So they pre-select only, and you'll see many times in the guidelines that you are not to contact them because they pre-select only. And the only way you can get into pre-selection is if someone in the foundation gets to know your work on the side, kind of not through a traditional system. You can write a letter of intent, etc. But their staff is so small, they don't want to spend money on staff, they want to re-grant their money. And to re-grant the money requires a lot of time and effort. And it's easier for them just to keep giving it to the same folks. Especially the folks that perform well. Then everybody's calm, there's no stress. It's good to have a business degree. Yeah, you can write, I have a clarinet performance degree. Anybody can learn to do this work. Later on, there's a question about my background, and I'll show you my background. So, how do you create the best mental movie? We can do this through, how can we do this best? Let's go to the IMLS site. And you're going to click on, let's see if I can do it here. Suchi, you want to try? Okay, so we want to go to grant recipients at IMLS. Are you with me so far? And grant recipients, click search our database of grant recipients. Click the database. That's the link, that's a live link. Search our database. Okay, now we want to go up. You want to click museum grants, right? And we want to, select museum grants and then select Florida in the state. And then go down and search. Oh, yeah, good. All right. So, this is a synopsis, it's called, you know, an abstract of a project. And these were all the projects that were funded. 2 museums. I don't know, there's 252 museum entries here. So it's a lot of museums in the state of Florida over, I don't know how many years this database includes. So if we look at the first one, this museum is in Sanford. Go ahead and read that. Okay, let's look at this second one. This is a Black museum, Black History and Cultural Museum in Delray Beach. I'm actually the consultant that's hired to do this project. So I'm going to be helping to develop a strategic plan for them. And I did the plan for them in 2005 through my company, consulting company. So are these descriptions giving you a mental movie of the project? Are you seeing kind of what they're asking for? You can read another one, this Gulf Coast Heritage in Osprey, Florida, tiny museum, they got $43,000. The first sentence usually tells you what it is. If you don't get a mental image picture in the first sentence of what this is, then you're probably not going to get funded. So, how do I describe, let's see, how to create the best movie? Well, the first thing I do is to create a timeline of the activities that are going to occur during the grant project. And if you create a timeline, then that's the beginning of your mental movie. So what do you think about these paragraphs? Are they creating visual images for you? Are they confusing you? Any feedback on these? Are they exciting you? Are they just boring you?
Shorter ones, you know, get to the point more, like the first sentence is, that's what gives you the picture of what they're doing. Oh, they're going to be upgrading their technology. Oh, they're going to be redoing their audio tours into different languages, and that's like the main.
Right. So you have to be descriptive about what you want to do, and if you, this is the last thing usually that you write when you're doing these proposals. So that if you start with a timeline, and then step 2, create your budget, and then step 3, write your narrative, and then step 4, and then get all the attachments together, and the last thing you do is write this little paragraph, then you go from all this information to a very short, and this is what the reviewers read to remind themselves of the 25 pages that they just finished reading maybe a week ago, and then they fly to Washington, D.C., and they sit around a table, and now they're trying to judge the proposal without having to go back and read 25 pages. So they're reading this paragraph, and they're making their decision on this paragraph. Or what they recall. How did they feel when they read your proposal? If they felt lousy and they couldn't figure it out because you have a terrible way of describing what you want to do, then you're not going to get funded. Do you want to look at another one like this? Okay, so go to NEH. Just show you an idea. How did I find? It's a database of past grants.
Search online database for any projects.
Where is it?
Whoops,
On the
no,
left-hand
just gave me
Left side down. Oh, yeah, there it is, okay. Online database,
Yeah.
okay. So now go down, and what did I do? It's searchable by keyword. So project, is there project, okay, go to field of project and find museum in that list. Museum studies. And then search just like that. Okay, everybody should be able to see 448 results here. All right, so this is even less information than what IMLS gives.
When you're reading through them, do you see things that are particularly good or less good? Saying they're all funded, I guess they're all good ones.
They're all good. You know, you can get excited about some of these things, and I think it's that energy of excitement and enthusiasm, of the creativeness of what you're proposing that grabs the imagination of the reviewer who says, wow, this would be so cool if we funded this. And that's really what you're trying to do, is if you want to do something that's, so for that one, the Black Museum in Delray, that wasn't exciting. But if you know how difficult it is for Black museums to stay afloat in this country without government assistance, you would know that this museum probably will go away if IMLS didn't fund it. So that's just basic knowledge that all the reviewers have. These other projects that are like the NEH ones, this one about ragas, you know, because the miniatures often reflect musical modes or ragas of classical Indian music. This is it's an assessment of 133 Indian miniature paintings on paper dating from I mean, that can capture your enthusiasm immediately. Like, wow, that's amazing, they have this collection. That's an amazing collection. I didn't know this collection existed. I didn't know what could be done with it. So the other thing is that the reviewer is learning something that they didn't know. Whenever a reviewer learns something that they don't know, you have a high likelihood of getting funded. So part of the purpose of a proposal is to educate reviewers about something specific in your institution or your program or your discipline that they don't know about. And if you do that successfully, then it's like watching the Discovery Station, you know? You get hooked. You watch National Geographic, you get hooked by the topic, by the learning, by all the new things that could come out of this. And that's what people fund. So, assuming that they understand what it is that you're doing, why you're doing it, and all the benefits is the kiss of death. Because they're not learning anything. You're not giving them anything to hang their hat on. But if you teach them something new, you would be amazed at the enthusiasm for your proposal. Or if you put things together that normally don't go together. So collaborative organizations like a prison, a museum working with a prison. Usually that doesn't happen, right? Tonight there's a whole lecture by a woman, Nalini, I don't know her last name. Dr. Natkarni? Yes, Dr. Natkarni. She is a contemporary dancer turned ecologist, and she has done projects with prisoners related to ecological sustainability. And she has gone to all of the tropical forests around the globe, and she's a researcher, but she just finished doing a project with a contemporary dancer on the topic of ecology and canopies. And they have performed this in various cities around the country. So, and she can get funding for ideas because she's putting people and institutions and concepts together that in normal life don't go together. That's another way to create enthusiasm. Okay, thanks for helping me. If we can go back. Are you finding these interesting? Okay, good. How long does it take to write a typical proposal? I would say at least 40 hours for a short one. A short one meaning 3 pages of narrative with a budget. I'd say 40 hours. If you're doing an NEH proposal, it's usually not one person's responsibility. So for instance, we did in July, I worked with 2 groups. We did 2 proposals. One was for NEH, and it was to create a portal on St. Augustine and the archaeological information that we have in various repositories in St. Augustine and here. That took, I would say, a month and a half of people working with me on it. And I had 5 people working on it with me. And I believe the narrative was 25 pages with all of the partners and all the partner letters and letters of support and resumes and very thick package and all the attachments that went with it. We also wrote a council for, it's a CLEAR grant. What does that stand for? Institute of Research Libraries. Council or Consortium of Research Libraries. And that was to catalog all the maps in our Florida map collection that are now not available to the public to browse or to even see or to know they exist. Very few people know they exist, so this was to reveal and catalog so that people could actually use and browse what the contents of the catalog of historical maps from the 1600s on. That was a much shorter proposal, but complicated. There were 4 of us working on it, and I would say intensively for a month working on that one. And then you have to weigh how much, we asked for, I think it was $300,000 or $325,000 for the NEH one, and we asked for close to $200,000 for the MAP one, and so people know it's significant and it's worth their time.
Who funded the MAP one?
It's not; we're pending.
Oh, okay.
It's
So is this
called-
an NEH as well?
No, it's CLEAR.
Oh, I'm sorry,
It's,
that's right.
it's
You did
money
tell me.
that comes from the Mellon Foundation. Okay, so here's an example of how one foundation handles the inability to staff a huge influx of proposals. So the Mellon Foundation granted funds to the this CLEAR organization, it's a nonprofit, to re-grant the money. So it made one award, and then CLEAR will give out probably 10 or 15 awards that CLEAR will manage and do all the grants management, and then give the Mellon Foundation a report of how all the funds were spent. And all the reviewers were volunteer scholars from all over the country, and so I think that's really smart of a foundation to grant the money to a nonprofit who can then gear up, hire staff to re-grant the money. So Mellon probably included staff money for CLEAR to hire a program officer to do all this work. But then they could claim that they gave away all of this money. So they didn't hire an in-house staff member, they hired a staff member they outsourced the entire project. Very, very wise move. What kind of training? I'm going to show you my resume, hopefully, if I can get to my documents. Let's see. Okay, here we are. So I've been here since 2008, but let me show you that. So this is the first job I'm including in my resume. I was the financial manager for the Pinellas County Arts Council, and I also was the Arts and Education Programs Manager. But I came in initially as the resident artist in music, and they found out I had accounting background because I worked for banks because I couldn't get a job as a clarinetist. And so when the financial manager quit, they asked me if I wanted to learn fund accounting because I was a reliable artist who showed up on time and had my curriculum all together, and I could, I taught people how to play woodwind instruments, and I was qualified to do that. And I was a professional. So after the first month, when the trainer left, I actually resigned because I couldn't balance the books. Everything was by hand, and it was fund accounting, which is multiple entries, and I couldn't get it to balance. So I went in and I told the director that I wanted to resign, and she said fine, and they would start looking for someone else. And in the meantime, it took me an extra 2 weeks, and I balanced the books. And then she told me later they were never looking for a replacement, that they knew that I could figure it out. So with this background, there was a job opening in Palm Beach County for grants director. There were 70 applicants for that job. I applied and got the job and moved to Palm Beach County to give away $2 million in public money. Because I had a financial background, I was an artist, and I was also an arts and education expert. And I had been on panels at the state because I was a professional artist, and I was also managing grant money at this local arts agency. Is this interesting? A little bit. So then I left the council because the director was insane, and I went to the Community Foundation, and this director was also not too sane. So I started my own company. Actually, I started my own company, which I still have, so it's further up. But during that time when I had my own company, I was the co-founder of the Nonprofit Resource Institute with funding from the MacArthur Foundation. All of these people funded this, and they wanted a professional to create it. And by then I had helped so many people learn to write grants and manage their money, and did all this work with all these organizations, because the Cultural Council, we re-granted 37 grants a year. And I knew all these cultural organizations and had worked with them efficiently, and so I had a good reputation. So I got this job and did it for 3 years. And the Nonprofit Resource Institute still exists. And I helped over 400 different individuals learn about all these things. And then I applied to the University of Arizona Libraries to be their grants manager because I lost my major client, which was the Morikami Museum and Japanese Gardens. I was their grants